For your final hardcover book assembly, you will need to have your hardcover, your book block with saddle, a glue stick, a pencil, your ruler, some scissors, and cardstock or construction paper for the pockets. First, let's take a look at one that's been finished. You can see that the book block and saddle are not glued inside of the spine of the hardcover. They're actually attached by the outer pages of the book block, and that is what holds it in to the hardcover. So this gives a free range of motion to our pages. The saddle really helps to reinforce those two outer pages, as well as keeping the signatures and stitching attached securely inside of the book. You can see where the threads are still visible but very embedded in that glue. And the glue is dry, but it's still fairly flexible so that we have a nice range of motion, but everything is pretty secure. One thing I want you to notice is how parallel the edges of this paper are glued down inside of that inside cover. You can see a margin of the painting and where it wraps around, and that's what we want. So I thought it's important for all of you to see this before we start gluing our book block into the cover. You should be at this point and your saddle dried overnight. Remember, we had a little bit of overlap where the brown paper is just a little bit larger than our text block. So now's the time to trim it. Really careful when you do this because you don't want to cut your nice clean edges. You want it to stay looking really straight and uniform. So you're going to take your scissors and really look at the edge there and just make sure that you're going in line with the edge. The longer the cut you make, so if you open your scissors up wide and you start up here, the better chance that it's going to be straight. If you're doing lots of little cuts like this, there's a really good chance it's going to be jagged. So try to open your scissors up wide and try for a longer cut. Okay, so now that looks great. Our book will be attached to the hardcover by these two outer pages. We're not going to be gluing the spine. That part is going to stay dry. You can see that there's no big, huge spaces in between. And you can also see that the signatures are pretty lined up. If you look on this side, you can see that this last one is a little bit taller than the other signatures, but they're not more than 1/8 of an inch, so it's close enough to pass for our handmade book. So we can kind of see the stitches a little bit and where we made the knots. See the edges of the signature there. So it's really attached and it's fused together. The brown paper, the string, and the very edge of our signatures, it's kind of fused it all together. And we don't have significant water damage to our drawing paper. Looks really nice. You can also see that these pages are pretty well lined up. We're going to attach these outermost pages along with the saddle to the inside of our book cover. We started with our book cover and we painted our book cover. The painting of our book cover was the very first thing we did. I made this one as a structural example to demonstrate how to put it together, but I didn't paint it, and I'm thinking I will paint it after the fact. Remember how we glued in our bookboard and our spine, then folded in the edges of our painting? Okay, so this one doesn't have paint, but this is the one I'm going to be attaching my book block to today. We see in the inside structure that we have our two bookboards, we have our spine that we glued in, and we folded those edges up, remember? Everything is locked in even if the glue didn't totally stick. It still is gonna work just fine. I will say that on the boards themselves, it's important for everything to stick just because we're gonna be gluing to this part, but in the middle, it's not gonna make a big difference if this part isn't completely stuck with the adhesive. So I am gonna add a little bit more glue. If you need some help pulling up an edge just to get under there a little bit better, your ruler is great for that. So I'm just gonna pull this up a little bit. So using the heel of your hand is a good way to attach the glue, because usually we don't have a lot of glue on the back of our hand right here. Sometimes we'll have pencil, like graphite from writing. So if you've been writing with a pencil, you might want to clean that part of your hand first. Starting out with clean hands is a very good idea. And applying pressure helps that glue stick to attach to the boards. And again, the nice thing about glue stick is it doesn't have a ton of water in it like the white glue does. I'm gonna take a little bit of the glue on my thumbnail. I'm gonna put it on my finger here, and it helps me to get a better reach underneath for a little bit better coverage. And again, if you don't have any glue stick left, because we have used it quite a bit, you can go pick up another one. I think they even sell glue sticks at the grocery store on like the office supplies aisle. They definitely have it at big superstores. Or I could leave some in the library for you to pick up. If your parent doesn't mind going down to the school, I can leave some there with the librarian. You can also use the white glue after it's dried out. Unlike this hardcover that I'm using today, your cover will have beautiful colors on it. Okay, you want to just push this together, and what you're doing is kind of making that triangle right there. Okay, so you can see that the book boards are pushed together. You don't need to lift yours up off the table. I'm just showing you on a flat, clean surface. You can push it together and you can look at the sides without lifting it up. And then while it's there, try to find that crease of your spine on the inside. This was sort of the purpose of this book, to have a really square structure. It's important to wash your hands and have a damp paper towel nearby that you can use to wipe your sticky fingers off on, so you don't leave marks on your cover. So you can see that this is the form you should have, and you should be able to lay it flat on the table and squeeze these boards together to where they're touching. And that's the right form for your cover to have before we apply our book block. So now we're going to apply the book block, and before you add any glue, you're going to want to put it in there. Just try it on for size. I want you to just try it on and see, where does it look the best? Where does it feel right? Where does the book look like it's going to close? So I know with mine that this side of my book boards it's not going to line up perfectly. And I might have more of a margin on this side then on this side. So, and look at both sides. So that looks pretty wonky right there. I want to look at both sides, and I want to sort of plan for how this is going to all look when it's put together. And this side isn't keeping its crease very well. The book boards are off by a little bit. So when you look at it, you can see, okay, it looks like the edges of these pages aren't going to line, the edges of the book aren't going to line up very well, and the inside paper looks like it's at an angle. So what I can do to offset this is to flip this over and just turn it upside down, and sometimes it will kind of offset the angles and it'll make it look better. So here you can see that the angle of the edges is going this way, and it kind of fits with my boards a little bit better since they're off. We can sort of minimize those design flaws that, well, if we started over, maybe we could do it better. But this is pretty good with what I have. And every single time you make something a second time, a third time, you're gonna learn things with each one. Each one that I make is a little bit better than the one before. That's how we continue to improve, is by trying and trying again. For our first hardcover book that we've ever made, try to do your best with craftsmanship, but also give yourself a little grace and know that, hey, this is my first time making a hardcover book. And even for my teacher, Miss Batty, who's been making things for a long time, she had some little issues, design issues with her book as well. But you know what? It's still gonna look super awesome. So I think this is probably the best way to go. I like this better than when it was upside down. So let's look at it again. We can see that the angle of the pages is going inward, but the angle of the edges of the book cover are going out. So it really highlights that my measurements were off. So I'm going to put it in this way because it minimizes that appearance of being off. I can also minimize that appearance by keeping this side of the spine wants to curve in more, which puts this out further. I can, my paper, because my paper bent in such a way that it wants to curve in there, I can try to bend this, but be very careful that you don't tear the paper. So you can use your ruler to make that crease look structured. Paper has a memory. It remembers where you folded it. It remembers where you creased it. You can help it out a little bit by pushing in an additional crease. Just beware of, you don't want to mess up the creases that are already working really well and making it look nice and structured. So I added just a little more of a crease right here with my ruler, and I think it might help the way my boards line up a little better. Things that are handmade, we expect little small imperfections, which actually give it more character. So I feel pretty happy with that. The other thing that we want to do is make sure that as we're gluing this down, we want to create a margin around the edge of the bookboard cover and our paper that is perfectly aligned, that is perfectly parallel. it's okay if we have more space here than we have here. But the important part is that it's parallel, because it will make a huge difference if we glue this down like this with little pieces sticking out, or if it's even all inside the edge, but it's kind of like wonky. Our book isn't going to close right, or it's going to buckle up inside of here, and it isn't going to look smooth. It's going to look all wrinkly, little folds and stuff on the inside here. We don't want any messy folds happening in the middle because we couldn't lay this down right. Our goal is to get these as parallel as possible so that when we fold it, it will all fold together in a really clean way. You can see that when this was glued down, it's really close to being even with the edge, and it's nice to see that little bit of the painting wrap around the edge of our book covers. So there's a nice even amount of the painting cover art that we can see around the edges, and that's what we want. It's nice to see that little bit of our artwork wrapped around, gives it a really clean look. And it adds some personality and color. If we're off on one side, it's going to throw off everything else. We want to get this as square as we can, and it will also affect the way that your book folds. If these papers are glued in without being parallel with the cover, it's not going to fold right. And usually what happens is it will just create extra little folds in here, and it just doesn't make for an ideal look, but we're just going to try our best to get these edges to be parallel with the inside of our cover so we can avoid those extra creases from happening. Okay. And this is how it should look in the end. After you try it on for size, see where it looks the best to you. Keeping in mind you want a little space at the top and you want a little space at the bottom. Here's your cover, and you have your book block oriented the way that you decided would look best. You know, you're deciding which one is the top, which one's the bottom, and you're making sure to put it in the way that you saw that it fit the best inside of your cover. Now you're going to make sure that you have the same amount of the cover extending beyond the book block on both sides. You want the same amount, so you can kind of feel that with your fingers. The best way to do this, you're going to stand this up in the center part here of your tray, and then you're going to put glue on this side. You're not putting glue in the spine, you're just putting glue all over here. You want to leave a little tiny space around the edge, and you're just going to do one whole side, and then before it dries you're going to lift it up and you're going to stick it to that first page, right? Okay, so now we're going to do it for reals. Okay, so you want to make sure to have your glue stick ready. Make sure you have quite a bit. You're going to need maybe at least that much because it takes quite a bit of glue stick. So if you have an extra one on hand, I would have it nearby. Make sure that you have a little paper towel nearby that you can wipe gluey fingers on. It should be barely damp because we don't want glue on our cover, but we also don't want to get a lot of water on our cover either. And this is going to be standing up in the middle. We can feel that there's even amount of book board extending beyond the sides. And so for this first one, it's laying down, but before I attach it, I'm going to stand the book board up. So now we're gonna stand it up in the middle. So you're gonna check on both sides and make sure you have some bookboard extending beyond your book block. Then you're going to lift up that bookboard and press it lightly to the book block. Okay, let's look at it from this side. We're looking at it from this side. Looks good. Okay, now let's open it up before it dries. And it's really not even. Look how close it is here and how far away it is here. If we can peel this off right now, let's try it again. And so while it's still wet, you can pull it off. And in a way, it even helps it to attach better because now you have a little glue on both sides. We're gonna just move it up a little bit. It's gonna dry fast at this point. Okay, and you only have so many chances to get it right. So I think hopefully this worked. Okay, let's look at it. That looks good. Okay, so it's parallel here. And it's parallel here pretty much, but I'm starting to realize that maybe my bookboard was not completely square because it's parallel on two sides and not on this third side. So it must be the bookboard itself. But I feel very good about that. And I found that place by holding the book up flat first and then opening it up, and I can see that it's pretty parallel. My other edges are pretty parallel. I feel like that's pretty good. So it's gonna want to attach out here, and sometimes it stays a little lifted up in here. If that happens to yours, it's okay if it's floating a little bit, as long as this outer part is attached. Okay, so now we're gonna turn it and do the other side. We're gonna stand this part up after we get this part glued. We're gonna put glue and just go just up to the edge, leaving just a very slight space around the edge. Now we're going to stand this part up straight, and you're going to lift this part up to standing. And as you do it, you can kind of see and before you squeeze it too tight, open it up a little bit and make sure your lines are parallel. I think that's gonna work quite well. Let's see. Okay, so holding the middle up, you're gonna take a dry, clean paper towel and just really smooth this out. And remember, we don't want our text block, look already, just that little bit of sitting on top of this, it started to ripple. So you really are gonna not want to lay this down on top of the gluey side. Even though it's glue stick and it's not as moist as the white glue, it still is moist. It still will affect your pages. So it was very minimal and it's like kind of dried out of there. So we're good, but even just laying it down for that little bit of time had an impact. So we got to be careful with that. Okay, so you want to make sure it's well attached. If you're gonna lay this down to work on the side, just put your dry paper towel underneath. Some of the edges you might end up having to add a little glue, but you can easily do it. So I'm gonna take a little bit of glue. I don't want it to be in a clump, but like that. I want to take a little bit of glue and just put it kind of evenly on there. I can see that I got the glue in there. And then with a clean finger, I'm just going to press that down. And voila! I was able to stick that down pretty well. Not there, so let's get a little bit more on here. You'll want to make sure to clean all this off of your ruler when you're finished. But it's a good way to get these edges to stick down. So our tools that we have this year, like our popsicle stick that we have in our art kit, those, we're using them as tools in more ways than one. So you can see now I have a nice glued down edge without messing up that paper. And again, just try to get it on there in a way that's not too clumpy. So we've used a thumbtack, we've used a popsicle stick, we've used our ruler, and we really made the most out of the materials that we have. At this point, when you're happy with your inside cover pages and happy with the edges, this one I had to do a few more times, so it got a little more bumpy, but I'm glad I did it because it's gonna close together nicely. You can just very quickly look and see. Mine's gonna look a little crooked right here, but you can keep the pages apart and still kind of see what it's gonna look like. Just don't want to keep those that wet glue cover too close to these pages because that moisture will go right through this drawing paper and it will penetrate all the way through, even to the center. Somehow that moisture has a way of transferring through those papers so fast. Pretty good. Alright, so I feel pretty good about that. A little air bubble right here, that's okay. And just stand it up like this. Okay, just remember as you're drawing it to keep the middle book block should be kept away from these sides. And make sure you tell your family members, tell your brothers and sisters, hey, this is my book, it's drying. Please don't lay it down because the glue is still wet and it'll mess up my middle pages. It's okay if you have a few extra little holes in there. Kind of helps to tell the story of your bookbinding process. Okay, and you'll have, this is what the spacing should look like in between. And that helps your pages to open evenly. But the saddle makes it possible that the book is still attached to all of your stitches, even if the paper is not really staying attached to the glue. The glue is still holding together those stitch bindings. gonna take your book, your finished book, and you're gonna just hold this here. Use your ruler and your pencil to sort of mark out where the edge of the book would be. The idea is we want the black paper to line up with that inside white paper that we glued down inside the cover. Measurements of this rectangle are 5 7/8 by 7 7/8. This one rectangle will make both pockets. You can just use your ruler to line up those marks. And then you'll use your scissors We don't want to cut our diagonal through the corners. Instead, rotate your straight edge to create a catch about 1 inch away from the corner on the vertical sides. This is so that we have a little catch to hold in small papers from coming out of the sides of our pocket. Okay, so you're gonna just cut along that line so it's nice and straight, and then attach that to the inside of your book. You don't want it all the way to the top, and you don't want it all the way to the middle. You want to keep it away from the fold a little bit so we don't have things getting in the way of closing our book. It'll be helpful if things can stick out of the top just a little bit so we can grab them. So all you're going to do is put a little bit of glue just along the inside right here. You don't want to go in too far, or else when you slide things inside, it's not going to be able to go in all the way. Wait until this paper is dry so that you don't have all of this getting damaged from the wet glue that's behind this paper. So grab your glue stick. If you're almost out of glue, you can even use your pencil to get some of the glue out of there, and that way you don't use too much either. Again, you can use your dry glue for this as well. So I'm just gonna go around the edges here and keep this line very thin as possible. And by now most of you should be almost out of your glue stick because we've used it to glue the artwork onto our cover. We've also used it to glue our book block into our hardcover. And if you want to wait a couple of days for your book block and cover glue to dry, you could dry out some more white glue and use that here, not too thick, not as thick as we used for our spine, but you could use it for your pocket as well. And I'm going to line it up right here directly with my inside paper so I can still see that little bit of artwork here on the outside. And I want it to glue here, and I want to glue it all the way around here, and that looks great. Here's my damaged pages. This is what it looks like when paper gets water damaged. And this isn't even bad, it gets worse than this. And this is from going through layers of paper just after gluing down the book block to the cover. This went through a whole bunch of pages, and that's how it affected it. Now mine is dry in this one, and I'm just drying this part, but I still want to be careful. Even though it's a very little bit of glue, I don't want it to affect my book block. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in between just as a barrier. It would still go through these papers too, but just as a temporary barrier while I do my back one. So here's my back pocket. Just use my pencil again, just on the outer edges. It's not going to hurt your pencil either, but don't sharpen your pencil maybe until this glue is dry so that it doesn't get the inside of your pencil sharpener all gummy. So I'm going to line up my corner here with the edge of my cover, inside cover paper, and just go along those edges and make sure they're attached. We have a nice little pocket that we can put things into. Alright, so remember, don't put your pockets in until after your cover paper is dry overnight, and then don't dry it laying down. Make sure it's standing up and that the pages aren't touching these inside areas where the glue is still drying. Keep in mind that the moisture from the glue will go right through these pages, even though it seems dry on the top. If these pages are laying down next to it, that moisture will go right through the paper and affect all of these. So you want to keep them apart. If you don't have an area where you can put this out of the way, where you're pretty sure nobody's going to bother it while it's drying, then tell everyone in your family, please don't touch this. It's my project and it's drying and it needs to sit there undisturbed. It's probably best if you can find an area out of the way where nobody is going to mess with it, but let people know. Okay, don't just assume that they're going to know, because many of you have already lost some of your art projects or materials that you were saving, like because your family didn't know you needed that bag, and your family didn't know you needed that little toothpick or whatever, and they just threw it out without knowing. So you need to make sure to communicate with the other people in your household. You can even write a little note and put it there right next to your things and just say, please don't touch. This is my art project that's drying. I'm really looking forward to seeing your projects, and we will be starting on something new very soon.